Keyshawn Johnson was not only a standout football player, but also a dynamic personality, captivating fans on the field and continuing to do so in his media career. Beloved by millions, he is known for his banter and expertise in a variety of sports. But it's important to remember that the man was also an elite receiver. In the late 90s, he lit fields on fire, but the end of his career is what we at FootballLore find most interesting. Unlike many elite athletes whose careers fade amidst injuries and declining performance, Keyshawn chose to leave the sport while still at his peak. This decision ensured his legacy remained untarnished by the struggles that often mark the end of a professional athlete's career. Today, we want to go over the life and legacy of Keyshawn Johnson, the elite NFL receiver who walked away from the game at his peak. Johnson was born in Los Angeles in July of 1972. He was born into an extremely difficult situation as one of 6 kids belonging to a single mother. His mother had to hold down multiple jobs in order to support the family, but Keyshawn would take advantage of this lack of supervision and get himself into trouble, ending up involved with gangs at a young age. He was incredibly talented at football, but his off-field behavior was always causing issues for the young man. Growing up in the inner city of Los Angeles was not easy, but football became a solace for Keyshawn. He would spend time watching the USC football team practice and even began to develop a relationship with the staff as a child. He began to help out with practices at just 7 years old. The USC football program did what they could to keep Keyshawn out of trouble. But at the end of the day, he made choices that took the situation beyond their control. He began to hustle more on the streets as a young teen, selling drugs, organizing robberies, and even catching a concealed weapon charge in just the 8th grade. That charge would land him a 9-month stay in juvie. After this, he would not be able to break the cycle for some time, bouncing from high school to high school, in between stints in juvie. When he was out of trouble and on the field, he was electric. He was the perfect blend of speed and hands, and there was no one in Los Angeles that could cover the young athlete. The allure of the streets were strong, and while several people warned him that it would derail his potential career, he didn't care. He was convinced that he could live the life he wanted, play football, go pro, and never have to make a change. For a while, it seemed like he was right. The man was a phenom on the field. He was so impressive that despite his off-field issues, schools like Miami were interested in offering him a scholarship. This was the peak of the U. They were churning out NFL stars like there was no tomorrow. Keyshawn being able to play at that school would be a huge break and a step towards eventually getting to the league. The issue was that Keyshawn Johnson had neglected his studies entirely. If it wasn't making him money on the street or related to football, he just didn't want to do it. Despite Miami offering him a scholarship, he was not able to attend because he could not score the NCAA minimum SAT score. This forced Miami to move on, and other schools didn't want to take the risk. At this point, he was an incredibly talented prospect, but he was constantly getting himself into trouble and seemed to have no drive to better himself. Johnson decided to attend a small college named West Los Angeles Junior College to hopefully leverage that experience into a D1 program. He was phenomenal when he was on the field, but his entire life would change one night during the season. He had still been involved in the streets, but at this time, things were becoming increasingly dangerous. One night, while on his way home from a night out, a car creeped up beside Keyshawn. Instantly, he knew that something wasn't right, but before he could react, the window rolled down and shots rang out from the car. Johnson instantly did everything he could to escape and at first thought he had managed to get away unharmed. However, as the adrenaline wore off, Johnson realized he had been shot in the leg. This injury had the potential to absolutely destroy his ability to walk, let alone play football, but Johnson bounced back. He used that incident as fuel to light a fire under him, to get his head on straight, but unfortunately it would only last half of a college season before he would face another crossroad in his young football career. 8 games into the season, Keyshawn just stopped showing up to practices entirely. Even if he had been unstoppable when he played, there was no way the coaches could allow a player to not show up to any team activities and continue to play. He was forced to sit out the next season and get his life together. At this point, Johnson realized that this was his last chance to turn football into a career. His talent was not going to take him further if he didn't start to grow up. He spent that year getting his academics in order and came back to the team a real man this time. His coaches and teammates could tell that something was different. He had a phenomenal year, catching 55 passes and scoring touchdowns on offense and special teams. He stood out as one of the most important weapons on the offense, and by halfway through the season, D1 programs were beginning to take notice of the JUCO receiver, blowing everyone away. This culminated when USC, the program he had been involved with since the age of 7, offered him a scholarship to come play at the school. This was a lifelong dream for Johnson, who jumped at the opportunity to be able to play for the Trojans. He would make sure that the school would not regret taking a chance on him. When he began to play for USC, he was able to catch the attention of the entire nation. His first year at the school, he caught 66 passes for 1,300 yards and 9 touchdowns. This performance earned him All-American honors, and they even secured a bowl victory in the Cotton Bowl. This Cotton Bowl game would see Keyshawn ball out, and he would win the MVP award due to his performance. This level of play on a major stage like a bowl game was an eye-opener for NFL scouts and all the programs who had passed on Johnson. Although it had been an incredibly long road to get to this point, he proved that he was worth taking a risk on. The increased on-field success also finally inspired Johnson to leave his life on the street behind. It was a reality that he had a shot at making it to the NFL, and considering the fact that the streets had almost taken his career away from him before, he decided to steer clear entirely. He might have been in the same city, but he began to act like that old life was a world away, which would boost his performance even more in his second year at USC. Going into the 1995 season, people were unsure how his production would change. On one hand, he had another year of experience operating in a college offense, but on the other hand, he had benefited the year before by being a relatively unknown player. There was no depth of footage for cornerbacks to prepare with, and some thought that he would have a harder time now that defenses would prepare for him specifically. It didn't matter that defenses were more aware of Johnson. His talent meant that you could put him in triple coverage if you wanted. He was going to find a way to get open. He had over 100 catches that year, 1,400 yards, and 7 touchdowns. He began to be known for his antics on the field at this point as well. Keyshawn was great at football, and he talked an equally large game to his opponents. He was extremely outspoken about the fact no one could cover him, and it enraged defenses that he would announce they wouldn't be able to cover him that Saturday, just to go out and walk all over them. This attitude made him a fan favorite and increased his notoriety in the sport. 1995 would be the last season Keyshawn would spend at USC, but he had one last major performance in the 1996 Rose Bowl. This game against Northwestern is an all-time classic, but Keyshawn had over 200 yards receiving with a touchdown in the 41-32 victory. This secured him the Rose Bowl Player of the Game and actually even had him inducted to the Rose Bowl Hall of Fame in 2008. After this game, Keyshawn declared for the NFL draft, and it would go down in history as one of the few times a receiver was the undisputed best player in the draft. Usually all the fuss in the draft is over a quarterback or the next defensive prospect that will carry a team. The 1996 draft had that hype totally focused around Keyshawn and his offensive ability. Some teams and fans thought that a player with Keyshawn's personality would cause locker room issues, but his USC teammates vouched for his leadership ability on the team. He did talk a lot of crap, but it was always focused toward the other team, and he was a natural leader of men when it came to his organization. The New York Jets had the first overall pick, and their head coach, Bill Parcells, was very interested in Johnson. This draft was absolutely stacked with receiving talent. The class included Keyshawn, Terry Glenn, Eddie Kennison, Marvin Harrison, Terrell Owens, Joe Horn, and Musa Muhammad. When it finally came time for the teams to make their pick, the New York Jets selected Keyshawn with the first overall pick. This came with a huge payday for the young star, but it also came with a cross-country move. Honestly, this was best for Keyshawn. It gave him a chance to start a new life in New York, leaving behind the dangerous affiliations he had in Los Angeles. We all know how jealousy can start to creep in, especially when someone is doing so well in life. He was now a multi-millionaire football star, looking to his first NFL season. We want to take a moment to thank the sponsors of today's video, you the viewer. Without you, this channel would not be able to operate, and we just wanted to say thank you for your support. If you are enjoying the video, pressing the like button and leaving a comment goes a long way, and we would really appreciate it. Going into training training camp, the expectations for the Jets were not incredibly high. Sure, they now had Johnson, but they had the first overall pick for a reason. He became a fan favorite for his outspoken nature. You never had to question where he stood on the state of the team or his play. New York amplified a personality that was already prone to being entertaining, and he soon became a household name. His on-the-field play his first season was not too bad either. He had 63 receptions for over 800 yards and 8 touchdowns. This would already be a solid rookie outing, but it is made even more impressive when you realize he had to catch the ball from Neil O'Donnell and Frank Reich. Both of the quarterbacks were solid backups, but neither had any business trying to lead a franchise. The Jets had an abysmal 1-15 record, but had a few bright spots like Keyshawn. 1997 would see a huge improvement for the Jets. They managed to improve their record to 9-7, which is miles better than the 1-15 they had the year before. Keyshawn also made huge leaps and bounds in his production, almost having his first 1,000-yard season and establishing himself as an elite receiver in the league. 1998 would be a huge breakthrough year for Keyshawn Johnson. He hauled in 83 passes for 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns. This performance was impressive enough to earn him a spot in his first Pro Bowl, and he even would follow it up with a strong playoff performance. The Jets had absolutely transformed in a few short years and ended the 1998 season with a 12-4 record. Keyshawn Johnson had gotten a huge boost in productivity by the Jets changing quarterbacks to Vinny Testaverde. Having a teammate who could consistently get him the ball was a huge change, but it allowed him to really dominate the defense. The Jets won their division for the first time in their history. Going into the playoffs, Jets fans were watching with bated breath, optimistic for their chances. Keyshawn would set the state for their off-season run in their divisional round victory of the Jaguars when he caught 9 passes for 121 yards and a touchdown. However, he also recovered a fumble, had a rushing touchdown, and even an interception on defense. Now that he had made it to the playoffs, he wasn't going home easily. That victory secured their appearance in the AFC Championship game, which was the first time the Jets had returned since 1983. Unfortunately, they would fall short to the Denver Broncos, but Keyshawn had very plainly made the case for himself to be classified as a top 5 receiver in the league. The 1999 season would not be as kind to the Jets. Vinny Testaverde suffered a season-ending injury in the first game of the season. This wouldn't throw Keyshawn off his path to domination. He had another great season with 89 receptions, another 1,100 yards, and 8 touchdowns. He made another Pro Bowl, but was starting to feel like he wanted more money to stay. The Jets fell to a measly 8-8 record, and while he had 2 years left on his deal, Keyshawn wanted to get paid. Johnson was an outspoken superstar, but the Jets were in a situation where their salary cap was not going to allow a bigger payday. Johnson and his agent threatened to sit out in training camp unless he was either paid or traded, and the Jets caved. In retrospect, that is pretty questionable because he had no leverage to really do this. Keyshawn is a great player, but usually if a player threatens to hold out, it is in a contract year. Keyshawn had 2 years left on his deal, and honestly, if the Jets would have called his bluff, there is no way he would actually sit out for 2 years. Sitting out 2 seasons would have destroyed his contract value, but the Jets didn't seem to realize that. They decided the best course of action would be to trade Keyshawn to the Buccaneers. They managed to get 2 first-round picks out of the deal, but the Buccaneers had just been to an NFC championship game and got what they thought was the missing piece of the puzzle. It also worked out for Keyshawn that shortly after arriving in Tampa, he signed an 8-year, $56 million extension. This made him the highest-paid receiver in the league at the time and also put him in a better situation to win games. One huge reason the Jets were not willing to pay him is because they were entering a rebuilding period. Bill Parcells had retired in 1999, and they knew that it was time to reset their cap and rebuild. Honestly, in retrospect, Johnson really won this trade. The Jets have been pretty bad since, and he would have a great career in Tampa. The new millennium saw a slight drop in production as he adjusted to the new system in Florida. He had 71 catches for 874 yards and 8 touchdowns. He missed the Pro Bowl this year, but overall it seemed that there was potential in Tampa. The one issue they had was that their offense lacked the production to get it done in the playoffs. This wasn't Keyshawn's fault, but they had an elite defense paired with an okay offense. The 2001 season would see the offense make improvements, especially when it came to the receiving core. Johnson had a career-best season this year, with 106 receptions, 1,200 yards in just 15 games. His ability to get into the end zone was diminished with just one touchdown, but he did make another Pro Bowl appearance. He was pretty much the only passing weapon in Tampa that year, and in the offseason, a huge change would be made. Tony Dungy was fired as head coach of the Buccaneers. He had done a great job sculpting the defense, but they just couldn't get over the hump. Even with consistent playoff berths, they were always knocked out pretty quickly. They traded for at the time, Oakland Raiders coach John Gruden in the offseason, in the hopes that he could deliver a Super Bowl championship to the team. Gruden and Johnson notoriously did not have the best relationship. Gruden is a huge proponent of running the ball in strong defense. This did not favor the play style of Keyshawn, who felt extremely underutilized during John's tenure. This tension would eventually come to a head, but the 2002 season would be one of huge success for both parties. Keyshawn would have a great regular season, with 76 catches for 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns. The Buccaneers had a great season and were going into the playoffs as one of the favorites to win a championship. They had completed the season with a 12-4 record and had the best passing defense in decades. Their first game in the playoffs was in the divisional round against the 49ers. They absolutely destroyed them. They had 5 interceptions in the destruction of San Francisco, and Keyshawn had a solid game with 85 yards receiving. The Buccaneers tended to be a team that relied heavily on the run game, but Johnson was the clear #1 target. The final score was 31-6, and they advanced to the NFC Championship against the Eagles. Keyshawn would play a key role in this victory, with a touchdown pass in the championship game that would help send the Buccaneers to the Super Bowl. Johnson had gone from being stuck on a middling Jets franchise to being about to play in the Super Bowl just a few short years later. This was the biggest opportunity of his life, and one he had been dreaming of since he was a child. The Super Bowl was a great matchup. John Gruden's former team, the Oakland Raiders, were facing his new Buccaneers. He had incredible inside knowledge of the Raiders' offense playbook, since he had created most of the plays the year previously. For some reason, the Raiders had decided not to change the playbook entirely, and this would come back to haunt them. The game was close, and Keyshawn had 6 catches for 69 yards. But ultimately, it came down to the incredible play of the Tampa defense that secured the 41-21 victory for the Buccaneers. Keyshawn Johnson had been the primarily offensive weapon for the passing game and had now become a Super Bowl champion. This checked that box for him regarding his career, and unfortunately, it would be a short-lived high for the relationship between Johnson and the organization. Going into the next season, Keyshawn made it clear that he wanted to play a larger role in the offense and integrate the passing game more. They had won a Super Bowl, sure, but a majority of the wins came down to the great play of the defense, rather than the explosiveness of the offense. This was counter to Gruden's defense and run-first philosophy, and the two began to butt heads often. This was not hidden from anyone. Keyshawn was never one to shy away from letting the world know how he felt, and they could be seen getting into screaming matches on the sideline during games. Eventually, the relationship became so tense that he would be deactivated for the last 7 games of the season. In the offseason, he would be traded to the Dallas Cowboys in exchange for Joey Galloway and be off to light the field on fire in Texas. He had an immediate impact on the Cowboys when he led the team in receiving yards his first year. His 6 touchdowns tied for leading the team, and it was nice for him to reunite with both Bill Parcells and Vinny Testaverde. The New York reunion would last just 1 season, when in 2005, the Cowboys would move on to Drew Bledsoe at quarterback. Drew added a bit more consistency to the passing game, but this didn't impact Johnson much. He had another 70-catch season for 800 yards and another 6 touchdowns. At this point, Keyshawn was getting a bit older for a wide receiver, and the Cowboys managed to secure a deal with a young Terrell Owens during the offseason. They couldn't afford to keep Keyshawn, Terrell, and Terry Glenn, so they decided to release Keyshawn. It was also thought that a locker room with both T.O. and Johnson would get out of control. He wouldn't remain a free agent for long, and just a bit after being released, would sign a 4-year, $14 million deal with the Carolina Panthers. He accepted the role of the number 2 receiver behind Panthers legend Steve Smith, and honestly, it looked like he would ride out the rest of his career, stacking up decent seasons in Carolina. His first season, he had 70 receptions for 800 yards and 4 touchdowns. This was pretty much the definition of his average season at this point, but for a second option, that production is still still impressive. The Panthers would throw a giant curveball in his direction when they drafted Dwayne Jarrett in the second round of the draft. At first, Steve Smith and Johnsons assumed they would mentor the young receiver as a third option, but just days later, the Panthers would surprise cut Keyshawn. Keyshawn was caught off guard, but claimed to not care because they weren't going to win a Super Bowl anyways. He had plenty of options still on the table. Jeff Fisher apparently offered him a spot on the Titans roster, but Keyshawn eventually came to the realization he was done with football. His entertaining ability had scored him an offer from ESPN, and he wanted to pursue that instead. The same day he announced his retirement, he announced his intention to work with the network, but this caught lots of people completely off guard. Sure, he had gotten older, but a 70-catch season being your final season is not standard for receivers. Usually they run their bodies into the ground. There is no argument that Keyshawn still had another 3 or 4 years of productivity if he wanted to. In fact, even after taking a year off football, he had an offer from the Dolphins to come play. It takes an extra wise person to realize that they are done with the game before their body forces them to be. There was also the perfect storm of the ESPN contract, which probably made him realize he didn't need to play football to make a great living. After leaving the NFL, he helped ESPN with the draft coverage and also joined Sunday NFL Countdown and the Monday Night Football show. He presented over 2 decades with the network, with multiple radio shows and appearances often on TV. Despite working closely with ESPN, they decided to buy him out of his contract in 2023. Allegedly, the network was forced to pay Johnson the remainder of his $18 million contract, and he would later sign with the Fox Sports Network, where he appears on several shows, including Undisputed. Even though the two are working on a joint sports streaming venture, the talent contracts are separate. He also owns a financial management company that handles his investments and also has had several TV shows he has been in or produced. One other talent he has is apparently dance, as he was on the 17th season of Dancing with the Stars in 2013. Outside of the realm of business, he has 4 children: Keyshawn Jr., Maya, Londo, and Vance. Unfortunately, his daughter Maya passed away in 2021, but his other children are pursuing their goals in her memory. His son Keyshawn Jr. was a wide receiver for the University of Nebraska, and his nephew is actually legendary NFL receiver Michael Thomas. Keyshawn Johnson's story is a testament to the ability to overcome a rough childhood and still make the most out of yourself. Despite his hard upbringing, he is an incredibly successful entrepreneur and athlete with a great family, proving that no matter where you get started, it's more about how you end up. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to comment down below. It helps the video perform better. And also press the like button. If you like documentaries like this, we post them often. Our last one was about the first black quarterback to win a Super Bowl, Doug Williams. Click the thumbnail on screen now to watch.